This is our presentation on behavioral support and functional communication training. So this connects to some past information that was shared to you earlier in the spring semester when I presented behavior as communication. And I talked about reinforcement and principles of positive behavior supports and applied behavior analysis. So this kind of jumps back into that and actually starts by talking about relationship-based supports and the need, now that you have the basics down in terms of kind of the behavior terminology that's often used out in the field, now it's time to really start thinking about meaningful interventions and questions to ask when examining behaviors as to why they're occurring and how we can best support the student to communicate, to interact appropriately, etc. So the most important thing I think is that all supports for behavior must occur in a relationship. So relationship-based supports are critical. As Pat Amos, who is a trainer and consultant in autism and also has 4 kids with autism, she knows firsthand the complexity of behavior. So she writes, behavior is a complex whole that achieves its best and fullest development through reciprocal relationships and ongoing engagement in meaningful mutual experiences. So I think that's the first place to always start. When we're thinking about making some kind of behavioral change in someone's life, do we have a relationship with that person? Have we established rapport and trust and communication with that person? And it's from there that we can help support their behavior. If we come in and we don't establish those things, then you're involved in a behavior modification kind of intervention, which are known to not be person-friendly and to not be as effective as supports that are based in relationships. So I cannot say it enough. Relationship-based supports and autism need to go hand in hand. So I'm starting today talking about my absolute 10 favorite questions to help you think about, productively, to think about behavior. So before we get into functional communication and data collection and functional behavior assessments and all this kind of fancy stuff, I like to start with these 10 basic questions that if we think about behavior this way, make changes based on the answers to these 10 questions, I have a feeling you'll be doing pretty well by providing relationship-based supports to kiddos with autism who have some significant behavioral issues. So it's pretty detailed in the slides, but I'm just going to go over them with you. So number 1, the first thing to do is the activity. And by activity, I mean behavior. A lot of people in the field choose not to use the word behavior because it's gotten such a bad connotation for inappropriate or negative types of activity. So a lot of people in the field have kind of moved over to using the word activity because activity doesn't necessarily judge the behavior just yet. So, so you'll see the word activity used here and behavior as well. So first, number 1 is the activity an attempt to communicate in the absence of other means. So all people can and should have a dedicated system of communication that is available to them at all times. Lacking that, they may fall back on methods of communication that get them into trouble. It is not their wish to have negative attention. They are only using the tools they have in an effort to signal their needs. So you, an experienced SLP, can help design a positive system that works for everyone involved. This is always the first place to start. When I was an autism specialist and worked at San Diego Unified, it brought into cases of kids with pretty significant behavioral issues or activities. My first question was, how does this child communicate? And if the answer was, well, we're working on that, or we haven't figured that one out yet, then it's like, okay, well, we need to figure that one out. And if kids don't have a reliable, efficient, effective way to communicate, then like this slide says, they're going to fall back on the only way they can communicate. And that's typically through behaviors. And sometimes we're just not good in the environment about listening to the more subtle behaviors that they may exhibit. And so they sometimes have to push to bigger behaviors. So you'll actually listen. So a lot of our behaviors that we see or activities from kiddos with autism stem from the lack of another way to communicate. So putting time and effort into a communication system is always worth it. And I usually don't have to explain that to you guys, because that's your passion and love, is to help people communicate. So it's critical for our kiddos with autism that they have these means, because it will absolutely reduce those unwanted behaviors. Number 2, could the behavior be health related due to mental or physical illness, medication, diet, and sleep issues? So no one behaves their best when they are in discomfort or in pain. So a thorough medical and psychological workup often pinpoints the source of behaviors in undetected injuries, illnesses, allergies, and related issues. So this is often unseen or not even looked at by a lot of individuals, because they're so intent on looking for antecedents and consequence and documenting it, that they're not first doing what we should always do, is rule out other issues that might be triggering these behaviors. And so think about all the characteristics we talked about and all the co-occurring conditions that might be going on with kids with autism. And so if they don't have a reliable way to communicate with you that they're in distress due to a gastrointestinal disorder, that they have significant acid reflux at this moment, then they might do it in a way that looks more like, more violent or self-interest types of behavior. So I remember working once with an individual who would significantly bang her chest, so much so that she had broken ribs, and just kept banging on her chest. And we tried to look for, what's triggering it? Is it stress? Is it something in the environment? What's the antecedent here? Wasn't able to communicate with us. So number 1 wasn't met. She didn't have a reliable way to communicate. But it was in time through her doctor that discovered that she was having pretty significant gastrointestinal, like acid reflux. And so when she would bang her chest, it would be because that's where she would feel the heartburn and burn. And so we could have done every plan for her, every reinforcement, every token system, every whatever. And without a reliable way for her to let us know that she was in some kind of distress, none of those behavior methods would have worked, because this issue was health related. So you do always want to make sure, does the individual have something else going on that might be playing a role here, especially if the behavior is self-injurious and or violent like that, but can't really see patterns in the data, in your data from the behavior. So always look at these things, because oftentimes this is why a lot of our friends with autism are behaving in a more dramatic or self-injurious way, is because of issues related to illness, medication changes, diet changes, or sleep issues, which are clearly huge issues in the lives of people with autism. So number 3 is the activity in question or behavior, a way of coping with difficulties in sensory regulation and overstimulation. Sorry. So for many people with developmental differences, sensory input is experienced as painfully intense. We talked about that a little bit in our characteristics section. So an intense experience may be followed by a period of shutdown when information does not register. This is people with autism have told us that. Temple Grandin have told us that she would, a sensation coming in, such a sound or touch, would become so overwhelming that she was able to just completely shut herself down not letting any other type of sensory information get in. And so a lot of our friends with autism might be so incredibly overstimulated that they shut down. And this kind of shutdown is looks probably behavioral, looks non-compliant, looks like, oh, he doesn't want to do it, or he doesn't want to, you know, looks volitional almost, when it actually could be a coping strategy because of the painfully intense experience in the sensory world for them. So many of these activities that used to be called self-stimulatory, so this self-stimulatory stimming, here's that favorite word we're talking about, are now understood as ways in which a person may maintain and balance their sensory system, if that is volitional or not. And so we want to make sure that we're looking and thinking about these behaviors. Are they ways that the child is coping with these differences in sensory regulation and movement? Are they providing some kind of, you know, coping mechanism to the individual? Are they helping them maintain and balance their sensory system? Or are they periods of shutting down that we need to provide them with other types of sensory input experiences so that they can avoid these shutdowns? Like that's a whole nother way to approach these behaviors. This isn't something that should be approached with, you know, punishment and reinforcement. This is all about their sensory and regulation system. This is so much more than ABA considers in individuals with autism. So I think we do need to add that to our thinking in terms of why behaviors are occurring. So if necessary, I do recommend occupational therapist. Another SLP. If you got a good SLP and a good occupational therapist for a kiddo with autism, woohoo, you're on your way to being regulated and communicating, which is awesome. So partnering with a good occupational therapist who might help with these sensory regulation issues will probably be really good for the kiddo. So not necessarily behavior change modification here, but sensory regulation and support so that kids don't shut down from overstimulation and or kids don't you know, get accused of stimming and doing these silly behaviors. We're starting to understand them more as actually regulatory. Number 4, is the activity unintentional? Already started talking about that. Is it a motor tic, a vocal tic, an activity driven by sensory overload? Is it illness? Is it anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder? What else might be going on for this kiddo? Not all behavior is intentional. Yes, I'm saying that as a board certified behavior analyst, I'm saying that. We have to look at these other non-volitional behaviors that are occurring for many, many people with autism and take a much different approach to those types of behaviors. I mean, those type of behaviors require accommodations, relationship-based supports, lots of different things, not just, you know, changes to how we reinforce or punish behavior. It's much more complex. We are much more complex than that simple model. So before much was known about the development and working of the brain and nervous system, people with disabilities were often treated as if everything their bodies did was intentional. Tic-like noises and anxiety-driven fight or flight responses were interpreted as bad and non-compliant. Rewards and punishments were doled out in the hope of distinguishing these types of behaviors. Now we know that many actions and reactions are not under direct conscious control and may even get worse when attention is drawn to them. So instead, we need to work around them and mitigate their impact by designing accommodations. We'll talk more about what these accommodations might look like for kiddos. Number 5, is there a good reason for trying to change a child's or adult's behavior? Or are we making a cosmetic response to an activity that is different but harmless? Oh, this is a big one. As our society has become more appreciative of diversity, it is becoming easier to ask, does the behavior in question make a significant difference? Is it the person with the disability who should change, or the people around him or her who need to learn more appropriate inclusive behavior? The million-dollar question. As people with disabilities step up to advocate for themselves, we need to listen thoughtfully, when they tell us whose problem or whose business they consider different aspects of behavior to be. This one is so big. So when we are sitting in teams deciding what behavior we're going to focus on or target for an intervention or support, this question has to be asked. Does the behavior in question make a significant difference? Is this something we need to really target, or is this more of a problem around understanding and acceptance? Or should we actually be targeting our efforts more on those around this individual instead of asking this individual to make all this change? That is very important to have. That conversation is critical to have with your team, with the parents, because we all need to be on the same page here. If we do believe it's a behavior that does impact the individual and it will provide them more skills and supports, if we do target the behavior for reduction and replace the behavior, then we're all on the same page and we should go for it. But if we're not sure if the behavior is actually just annoying or challenging, you know, like, should we really, really focus our energies on changing it? So, and you'll interact with families who might have different opinions than you do about this. You might think this is a significant behavior that we need to focus on, and the parent might disagree with you, or the other way around. You might think this is minor, and others need to accept this as part of this individual's body and neurology. And the parent might disagree. They might want a very specific plan to eliminate any type of behavior that makes the child look like they have autism. So there's no easy answers here, but this is something that we absolutely do need to consider when we're thinking about behaviors to focus on. Number 6, are the person's preferred interests or passions honored, encouraged, and incorporated into everyday activities? Or are they taken away to be doled out as occasional treats and rewards? So there's a quote in the book from Herb Lovett called Learning to Listen. And the individual with a disability says, well, don't tell them what you like, or else they make you work for it. So this is something to think about. So it is absolutely critical that we are understanding things that people don't need to work for, and that they should have because they don't have to work for it. I've been in classrooms where I've seen interactions between staff and a student with autism, and the staff was reminding the individual, remember, you're working for snack, you know, you need to finish, so you're working for snack. It's like, wait, he's working for snack. So if he does not meet this task, are you not going to give him food for snack? Like, what are you doing? Oh, no, we'll give him snack. Like, we're not going to do that. Then why are you telling him he's working for snack? He's not working for snack. And so there's lots of ways this punishment reward system has been used unethically. And so we want to be careful about what we decide to kind of take from people and use them as reinforcers or dangle them in front of them. So anyways, let me read these. Passionate preferred interests give life meaning. Without them, people feel lost and can have difficulty investing in everyday activities. Sometimes preferred interests are treated as bizarre behaviors, while other times they are considered convenient tools for behavior control. So exploring their meaning with an open mind and expanding their possibilities in daily life is preferable to losing these vital interests in a power struggle. Good points. Number 7, does the activity seem extreme or puzzling as a response to the immediate antecedent or trigger? If so, could its roots lie in confusing or traumatic events in the person's near or distant past? Sometimes we are told that people with disabilities don't have the intellect or the memory or the emotions to respond to anything outside their immediate visible situation. This is not true. Research now suggests that many people with disabilities may be especially sensitive to traumatization. Teachers and support staff should be familiar with evidence-based practices like trauma-informed care in order to identify and de-escalate behavior with roots outside of the immediate situation. So these are for those situations you're trying to determine what's going on with kids. You hopefully have ruled out any kind of medical issue that might be going on for them. and you're not seeing any connections with what's going on in the environment in terms of antecedents or consequences of the behavior. So it might be, you can't rule out that it might be due to a past traumatic event, either that has recently happened to the person or, you know, in the past has happened to the person. So that can oftentimes serve as this hard to determine or impossible to see trigger or antecedent to some of these puzzling behaviors that we see. And so having that information or going through training for trauma-informed care, or just even considering that this might be the issue, I think shows respect of the person and their experiences. The statistics around abuse and people with disabilities is incredibly high. So there is a good chance that you're working with an individual who has experienced abuse, neglect, or other kind of traumatic events in their life, and that will absolutely play a role in the behavior, and may be triggered by things that don't seem to relate, but for that person might. So always keep an open mind that this might be playing a role in the individual's behavior. Number 8, what support skills and accommodations would allow this person to respond in a more effective and acceptable ways? So now we're thinking about what's out there that might help, not necessarily control, but or make people compliant. Compliance is not the goal. I've said that a million times in our past training. It's about building skills. So what's out there that might help them build skills? So positive behavior supports, ABA, even if used appropriately, does have a lot of research-based practice for modifying the way activities are designed and ensuring that needed skills are in place so people with autism or disabilities can succeed. Accommodations make helpful changes to the environment so the desirable places and daily routines become accessible. Using these practices, we put our energy into fixing the way things are done, not fixing the people to whom they are done. So a lot of the times when you start doing these FBAs, or kind of functional behavior assessments to determine why behavior is going on, you're going to see that, oh no, it's our fault. Whoops. Oh no, we're not consistent with that. Oh no, we don't have a schedule. Oh no, we don't provide clear instructions. Nope, we have way too many transitions in this person's life. Gosh, I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, the plans in a behavior intervention plan are really more for the staff than the actual individual, because it's not, you know, they don't have a reliable way to communicate. There's no supports in the environment. There's no visual support. So a lot of these things, a lot of the supports and accommodations are about us changing our behavior, not necessarily the person who needs to do the changing. Okay. Number 9, what support skills and accommodations would allow family members, teachers, and support staff to respond in a more effective and acceptable way? So if we aim to understand behavior that challenges us, those involved must be willing to scrutinize themselves, their misperceptions, and their potentially inappropriate reactions, and be willing to change too. Since behavior is a complex whole, behavior change calls for a holistic approach. This is challenging. Many don't like data analysis that says, well, I think you're trying to, you know, help the individual not do that behavior, but you're actually reinforcing that behavior when you do that. And people don't like to hear that. They don't like to hear that they're a part of the problem. And so we have to make sure that if we do start looking at behavior change procedures, that we're all willing to examine our own behavior, change our own behavior. And the data may show that we are the ones who are actually provoking the behavior, or we're the ones that are actually maintaining the problem behavior because of our inappropriate responses to it. Not that we're meaning to do that. I mean, most of these things are happening and we're unaware, but data collection and analysis might show that, you know, every time the child screams and yells, you know, you stop treatment and pull out a fun game, and they've learned that that's the way I get the fun games. And so you might be trying to support the child by helping them calm down, but actually you're probably also reinforcing that type of behavior. So you're a part of the problem. So it's not your intention to cause that behavior to occur again and again. You are a part of that analytical relationship that's occurring between the trigger, the behavior, and the consequence. So it is good to understand your role and be willing to change if things are happening. If analysis shows that we're a part of the problem, we'd be like, okay, didn't know that, now we know, and we can move forward. Number 10, this is the last one and the big one. It's the person's quality of life, all that it should be. The final question often holds the key. Challenging behavior can be a powerful signal that life is passing this person by. They may have lost hope that they will ever enjoy the life that they want or be valued for who they really are. They may be acting out of frustration, panic, or despair. So some things to consider: is the person presumed competent and living an age-appropriate lifestyle? Or are they talked down to, treated as a much younger person, deprived of opportunities for emotional attachment and expression, etc.? Is a person presumed sociable and supported in social activities of their choosing? Or is he or she directed to isolated, segregated places and activities? Is this person engaged in activities at school, at work, and in the community that he or she has chosen and finds meaningful? Or are their days pre-programmed and repetitious and boring activities selected for the convenience of others? Boy, so this is clearly probably the most important question. We might be able to make small changes to very isolated antecedents and consequences in the child's day, but that's not going to take these kind of issues away. So this is what I think is powerful about methodologies such as positive behavior supports, is that they try to look at the child in a more holistic way in terms of, let's look at this child's quality of life. You know, do they have supports in other areas? Because this will absolutely play a role in their everyday behavioral issues. And so if we're simply looking at behavioral issues as isolated instances and not taking into consideration the full view here, that behavior is going to continue, and we're going to see a child who might, you know, lose access to a more inclusive setting, or lose opportunities because we're not really addressing these very important quality of life issues. Okay, break please. Yeah, almost. So we're moving away from our 10 questions, and we're going to start talking about functional communication training, which is also a chapter in your text. It's more specific. So this actually is really designed, it's obviously based in applied behavior analysis, a little bit of positive behavior supports as well. But it's for behaviors that we do feel have a communicative intent. So there is something the child is meaning to tell us, which means these are volitional behaviors that we're looking at replacing. And the goal of functional communication is to replace those interfering behaviors, which might be disruptive behaviors, might be, you know, some repetitive types of behaviors that might be communicative, or subtle, less clear communicative forms such as reaching or leading. And we want to replace those with more conventional communication forms such as pointing or picture exchange or signing or vocalizations. So we are attempting to do the number one question, is to put a communication system in place for this individual. But we're seeing that communication, that behavior is communication here, and that we're targeting behaviors that we feel the child is trying to communicate with. So this is important to distinguish, that you're not trying to target behaviors that you think are a result of sensory breakdown, you know, sensory or regulation issues. That you're not targeting behaviors that we think are related to sensory movement differences or that are non-volitional in any way. This method is really used for behaviors we think that are simply trying to communicate, and we need to replace those you know, interfering behaviors with more appropriate communication. So this, as an SLP, is where you're going to come in and you're going to play a vital role in helping that child replace the unwanted behavior with more functional communication. And so your job on the team might be to actually help build a communication system. You know, what's appropriate for this individual? Is it signing? Is it pictures? Is it vocalizations? And so this process is specifically designed really for SLPs about helping students with autism gain functional communication. So as I just said, I just defined it. It's functional communication training frequently used to replace interfering behaviors that might be disruptive or repetitive or stereotypical, and are less subtle, less clear communicative forms, such as reaching and leading, with more conventional communicative forms, such as pointing, picture exchange, signing, and verbalization. Again, there's always, before you start doing some very dramatic, and not dramatic, but complex kind of data collection and intervention, you just want to make sure some things are already happening in the environment that we can, if we can make an easier type of intervention that might impact the behavior, we should try that first before involving ourselves in pretty complex assessment procedures. So you want to make sure that just good behavioral support is going on in the environment. So responding to those 10 questions that I talked about, but also making sure, are we responding to the initial problem as having a communicative intent? Are we even recognizing that it's possibly communicative? Are we providing supports for communicative expression, not just for the behavior issue, but for everything? Providing information about activity expectations to students in a manner that is understandable. Are we doing that? Best practice. Are we teaching rules explicitly in terms of how behavior is supposed to be in different settings? Do we provide choice? Are we considering the student's physical comfort? Are we maximizing their engagement? Are we providing them multiple ways to participate? Are we using things like the PREMAC principle, where we might encourage kids to be more motivated to do an activity that's non-desirable? Like, if you do this, then we can do this. Or if you can do this, we can get this. Providing high rates of positive feedback and meaningful corrective feedback. I'm sorry, positive reinforcement and meaningful corrective feedback. If those things are in place, then you're doing good. But there might be, you know, the behavior might still be occurring. So we want to keep moving forward with a functional communication assessment. So other things to think about, I talked earlier about accommodations. So sometimes simply putting in some accommodations for the individual might help eliminate the behavioral issues. So let's think about some environmental accommodations we might want to put into practice. Are there ways of alleviating overstimulation or stimulating a nervous system that's getting too little input from the environment, or again, alleviating that overstimulation? So again, they could be hypo or hyper. So we want to make sure we're providing them with what they would need in terms of their sensory system. Are there ways of organizing, simplifying, and clarifying crucial aspects in the environment and the task? Can we help them with some self-regulatory accommodations? Ways to keep the individual's senses and emotions in balance, such as deep breathing, or exercises when they're anxious, use of a weighted vest or a lap mat, using a break card to take a break and have a, you know, kind of regulation kind of time. There's lots of strategies out there, like, oh my goodness, I'm totally blanking on the, zones of regulation. The zones of regulation types of accommodations, where kids can recognize their self-regulatory behavior and seek accommodations for those, so that they're not going all the way to a behavior. Are we looking at any interactional accommodations that might be needed? These are ways of adapting to different styles of social interaction, slowing down, offering more wait time, reconsidering how and when to use touch with a touch-sensitive person, avoiding jokes with a person who approaches language literally. There's lots of interactional accommodations that might help alleviate some of these behavioral concerns for individuals. So again, there's a lot of work to do before we even think about starting a functional behavior assessment, an FBA, in a FCT, or functional communication training model. So there's lots to do before we even get there. But if we do all of that and we're still finding that the kiddo is having these behaviors that are clearly communicative but need to be replaced with more appropriate communication, then it's probably okay to move into these couple steps to do. So let's go over functional communication training. I also recommend that you actually read the chapter in your text that talks about this. So step one. So first thing to do is actually identify the interfering or inappropriate behavior. It could be hitting, grunting, falling to the floor, and know that it serves some type of communicative function, and that it's probably being reinforced, perhaps unknowingly, so that it continues to occur on a regular basis. Or it might be a subtle communication attempt that can be replaced with a more conventional form of communication. So once we identify that interfering behavior or subtle form of communication, then we can start to work on possibly replacing it with more functional communication. So step two would be to conduct our assessment. So understanding, why the behavior is occurring in the first place. So an FBA, a functional behavior assessment, most likely if you do become involved in these, you won't be the only person doing them, unless of course you're the only person working with the individual. But an FBA is a process that gathers information about problem behavior and the environmental conditions that predict and maintain the behavior. So it is very much based in ABA, but it does give us, you can expand it to really look at an issue, a child more holistically. So it has grown in years to be much more person friendly. So these are the 6 outcomes of a functional behavior assessment. Functional behavior assessments can occur in schools. They're an actual assessment, so you do need consent from parents. It can occur, FBA occurs in private practice, it occurs in hospital settings, wherever a child is having problematic behavior, an FBA process can occur. So this is what the outcomes of an FBA. It's a description of the student's problem behavior and daily routine. And so you are trying to get a little bit of a holistic picture of the child and their life. It tries to identify the consequences that maintain the problem behavior. So why do you think the behavior keeps occurring? What in the environment is reinforcing that behavior to continually occur? It works on identifying the antecedent conditions that may set the occasion or possibly trigger the problem behavior, as well as an antecedent conditions that do not trigger the problem behavior. It's always good to see, environments or conditions the behavior doesn't occur in. We often learn more from those situations, and then look at occasions when it does occur. We want to work on the identification of setting events that make the problem behavior more sensitive or less sensitive to the maintaining consequence and their associated antecedents. So setting events are things that might happen before an antecedent, something like the child didn't eat breakfast, the child didn't sleep well, the child has very rigid issues around when they leave the house, and that didn't happen. So the child kind of comes to school is more sensitive. So a trigger that the child may have been able to get through on another day will probably be more of an issue because they're already kind of sensitive, and things are not going well in their day. And so because of that setting event, and so they're gonna probably react a little differently to things that they might be able to cope with on other days. It's also going to look at or produce a written hypothesis that synthesizes the foregoing information into a testable summary statement about the problem behavior. So in terms of why we think the behavior is occurring, what is this behavior trying to communicate? And that might possibly be the function of the behavior. So 6, and then it also includes direct observations of the student's daily routine for the purpose of tentatively confirming or disconfirming the hypothesis. So we will watch the child in the daily routine to confirm, is this really telling us, you know, that the student does not want to participate in this activity, or is the child trying to escape the task or the activity through this behavior? What are they trying to communicate with us through this behavior? And are we seeing that happen when we observe the child in their natural environment? So a successful FBA is one that includes the person and his or her family in the investigation and the discussion. Yes, very critical. Is carried out unobtrusively without drawing undue attention, observes behavior across a variety of times, places, and situation, evaluates the physical environment for stressors or triggers, explores the impact of things that occur before and after the challenging behaviors. They often tell us a lot. Specifies needed changes in the behavior of other people. That's often a huge section. Specifies how communication is occurring and can be improved. Considers developmental needs and age appropriateness. Considers mental and physical health factors. Considers whether experiences from memories from the past or traumatic events may impact the present. And is also alert to the possibility that this behavior may be non-volitional, not under intentional control, such as a motor or vocal tic, and carefully explores quality of life issues. So again, you can see the connection here between a successful functional behavior assessment and the 10 questions that we talked about at the beginning of this lecture. There's got to be a connection there. And so an FBA can be used in a very person-focused way. It is something that I recommend. Okay, so once your FBA is conducted, usually with the team, and we can then we understand why the behavior is occurring, when it's occurring, with who it's occurring. We have all that information now, so we can move forward with our step 3 here to actually identify a replacement or a substitute for that interfering behavior. And the reason why it's called functional communication training is because often the way we're going to replace that behavior is with a new form of communication, a more appropriate way for that individual to communicate. So in order to do that, there's kind of 5 steps to identifying the replacement behavior. First is that we're going to select a form of communication. It could be signing, it could be verbalizations, pictures, whatever the team, and typically you as the SLP will be leading this, whatever your assessments have deemed appropriate for that learner. Now, I always say, you know, choose a method that's not too hard for them, because if we're asking kids to do verbalizations and they're just barely there, and you're asking them to produce a full sentence when they're agitated and upset and overwhelmed, then good luck, that's just too much for them. So try to pick a form of communication that is more doable for them, that they can actually get out when they're really stressed out and, you know, kind of not doing their best. Like, so don't choose something that's too hard. The replacement behavior should be simple enough to be taught in a short amount of time and allow the learner to quickly acquire the behavior and gain access to the reinforcement. If learners are asked to produce a complicated replacement behavior, they may revert back to the undesired interfering behavior. So make it easy and make it efficient. Now 3 is identify a replacement behavior that is acceptable and appropriate for both the environment and the learner. So the replacement behavior should be appropriate for the learner's environment and be a task or activity that the learner can or will do. For example, teaching a 7th grade student to hold up a large picture of a toilet to request a bathroom break is not acceptable in an inclusive middle school setting because it may invite unnecessary teasing from classmates. So in that kind of situation, it may be more appropriate to teach the student the sign for toilet. So number 4, choose a replacement behavior that is recognized by multiple communicative partners. So if the replacement behavior is not recognizable to others, communication partners may not respond, and the interfering behavior may not be reduced. So teaching a learner with severely reduced intelligibility to say, I need help with this, may not be appropriate use of functional communication training. So if the sentence is too difficult to understand, communicative partners may not provide the assistance consistently, and the interfering behavior most likely then won't decrease. But if the learner is taught to sign, maybe help, or use a picture card for help, the communicative partner may more quickly recognize the communication and then provide the immediate reinforcement or recognition of the communicative intent. But I've said signing a couple times, but signing I would be careful with sometimes because it's only recognizable with a limited group. So either to people who already understand sign language, or even more limiting, a select group of people who have learned an individual learner's version of signed words. So other forms of communication, including pictures and speech generating devices, may be easier to generate to multiple environments. So you might want to stick with that. We do go to sign a lot, but there are issues with sign. Incorporate attention getting into the replacement behavior if necessary. This is critical. So we should recognize that learners using nonverbal communicative forms, such as signing or pointing to pictures, may need to gain the attention of the communicative partner prior to making requests. So gaining the attention of others before making a request is particularly relevant if initial instruction in functional communication training occurs in an environment in which the learner already has the communicative partner's attention. So in other environments, the learner may be unable to use the replacement behavior successfully if the communicative partner is not attending. For example, a learner may be signing help while paraeducator is not attending, or is attending to another student or something. So the replacement behavior could be to first touch the communicative partner's shoulder and then produce the sign. So again, that'll need to be taught explicitly. So the replacement behavior should be one that is easily taught, is agreed to be appropriate by all team members, including the classroom teacher, paraeducators, special ed staff, parents, and potentially the learner, and is easily understood by the communicative partners. And the replacement behavior should always result in the access to the reinforcement, or access to others understanding the communicative intent of the behavior. Okay, step 4, designing and implementing data collection procedures. So just like we talked about social skills. As you're designing these interventions, you also need to be designing the way you're going to collect data on this type of intervention. So this intervention is very behavioral, and so there's lots of things to collect very kind of precise data on, but it should be functional data, should be meaningful and available. It should focus on measuring antecedents, looking at prompts or cues, should be measuring how frequently the student's using the replacement behavior, should be looking frequency of the target interfering behavior. So hopefully we're going to see an increase in the replacement behavior and a decrease in the interfering behavior. We're going to also take some data on the consequence of the behavior, especially if there's needing to be some environmental changes around the consequence. So data should be collected before you start the functional communication training intervention as our baseline or pre-data. And then as you're doing this intervention and you're doing it hopefully with a team, then you're going to be collecting this data at least weekly to see if we're seeing any change. So the data is going to monitor the effectiveness and be used to make adjustments if the interfering behavior is still continuing or increasing, and we rarely see the child using the replacement behavior, then we need to come back to the drawing board and either look back at our FBA to understand, did we even do this right? Or to make changes. Maybe the replacement behavior is too hard, or maybe it's, doesn't fit the environment well. So we might have to make some changes to that. Step 5, manipulate the environment to elicit the interfering behavior. So this is when we're starting to actually teach. So you want to start manipulating, and this is where it's tricky, manipulate the environment to elicit the interfering behavior. So you almost like in a very ethical way, triggering the problem behavior to occur. So this is obviously going to be in a controlled setting where if things get out of hand, you're able to support the child. But you're kind of creating situations in which the child might use the inappropriate behavior. And then you're going to want to start teaching the replacement behavior during these situations. You are going to obviously give them some information before they're escalated, because teaching during escalation is ineffective. So you do want to teach them the replacement behavior when they're calm. But in order to really make it stick, you need to make sure that you're providing support when normally the interfering behavior would occur. And so sometimes you're doing a lot of prompting or cueing, and you're very, almost in their face with, nope, use the card or touch the switch, or they might be screaming and kicking and biting and doing all these things, but okay, well, we'll get help as soon as we hit that button, or give me that card. And so you want to make sure you try to ignore all the other behaviors that are going on and only reinforce when they actually use the replacement behavior. So this obviously is going to take time. It's going to take repeated practice. It's going to take consistency from staff. It's going to take patience from you. This is the actual teaching of the interfering behavior, but it does require you to be engaged and others to be engaged with the child in situations that might trigger the behavior, interfering behavior, and then you're there to reinforce, to redirect, to practice the use of the replacement behavior. So then in time, you're hoping that the child will see, oh, it's way easier to get my needs met or my communication heard if I do that. Like, that takes way less energy than all this other stuff I've been doing. So that's your ultimate goal, is to make the interfering behavior, not necessary anymore, because they have this cool new way of communicating. So again, this is going to take the time and the energy and the sweat. This will definitely be the tough part. As you're getting better at practicing, then you're going to move into 6 about making opportunities for generalization. So you might have some success for the child in a very controlled situation in terms of them being able to access their communication instead of doing the behavior. But now we want to increase it to, can they do it with other people? Can they do it with other environments? Can we do it if we vary the prompts? Can we do it if we eliminate some of the prompts? This child is very much able to do it, but it requires my redirection, my verbal prompts, my gestures. Is the child now able to do the communication and avoid the problematic behavior in many occasions, many environments, when the vocabulary is different? And so this is sometimes where kids get stuck, because they have trouble generalizing what they've learned in a more controlled, supportive situation to a situation that might be a little bit more uncontrolled and unpredictable, and have more sensory, things going on in the environment that make it really hard to generalize. So this can be difficult. So let's go to the next one. 7. So prompting learners to use the replacement behavior. We're going to go very behavioral here and go that errorless learning is the goal. That errorless learning is when we're not accidentally reinforcing the old behavior anymore. We're making sure that every time, even with the most support, even with almost hand over hand support, they're getting it right and they're learning it right every time. So you don't want them to kind of encode errors in their learning. You want it to be errorless, so that they're, even with the greatest amount of support, they're not struggling. We're offering that support so that they get it right each time, and that it's the hope is that we can start slowly fading those supports in time, but it might take a lot of prompting to change these behaviors, because these behaviors probably were occurring for a very, very long time. So you want to work and make sure you're not reinforcing the interfering behavior, which is quite difficult. You're not giving into the interfering behavior because you're tired or you're stressed about something else, that we are kind of implementing the strategy with effectiveness, with fidelity, and not reinforcing the interfering behavior. Because if we go, fine, just stop, like, okay, we're not going to do this activity because you're screaming, and we give into that, then we're almost like back at the beginning in terms of now I've reinforced that interfering behavior, and they're not going to use their device as much because I'm letting them go back to their old ways because I'm getting tired, or I'm getting bored with this intervention or something, or other things are going on. So do your best to not reinforce that interfering behavior. Providing reinforcement. When learning, immediate reinforcement is key. So we do want to make sure that kids are learning that that they get access to something. So if they're using their communication to replace the interfering behavior, that we listen to that communication, that we're providing the reinforcement, that we hear them, and we hear only that. We don't hear all this other stuff that's going on, and we try our best to ignore the rest of the interfering behavior and focus only on the replacement behavior. And this is hard stuff, you guys. This is not easy, but this stuff has been really proven in the literature to be effective when you got really troubling behaviors that just need to be replaced with more functional communication. We already talked about all these rules of reinforcement, but I kept the slide in so you can refer back. I'm going to put those PowerPoints up that we referred to earlier in the semester or in spring semester, if you want to go back and rewatch them again to listen to things about reinforcement and how powerful that can be if used correctly. We want to start shaping the response. You initially accept any approximation of the replacement behavior. So this is thinking, gosh, think about, here's an example. Approximations of replacement behavior are often imperfect. So a learner may be taught to request, I want a snack. As the communicative response is introduced, the learner might simply say snack. And so initially teachers or practitioners will accept this communicative attempt because it is preferable to the behavior. So the child might be grabbing food or from the shelf or something. And so yes, the desired behavior is to say, I want a snack, but the child said snack, that's way better than the child grabbing for the food. So let's go ahead and reinforce that. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Think about like potty training a child, like you reinforce, you shape every little behavior. If they simply step into the bathroom and stare at the toilet, yay, we're reinforcing that because we're stepping towards the desired behavior. So we do need to make sure we are reinforcing, acknowledging those approximations of behavior. You should shape the production of the replacement behavior by reinforcing closer approximations of the replacement behavior until it more closely resembles the desired production. You can change the replacement behavior if it appears that even with opportunities for shaping, the learner is unable to produce it accurately. So sometimes this is when we decide, I don't think they're able to get to that, what we thought was a great replacement behavior, so let's rethink what we're going to accept as acceptable approximations. And so sometimes we ask kids to do more than they really can, given all the other things that are going on. So this might be a time that the team decides to slightly change or adjust the accepted replacement behavior. You want to always consider fading the use of prompts or hand-over-hand support, anything that is kind of not allowing the child to do the behavior independently. And so always try to make sure we're not making kids prompt dependent, and we're not, we're allowing them to self-discover and support themselves. So fading the use of prompts once the child is able to produce the behavior on their own, do it. Sometimes we forget the step and we're over supporting, we're over prompting kids, and they become so incredibly dependent on that kind of prompting. So always work to fade the use of prompts. To work on increasing the time between the replacement behavior and the reinforcement. So once the child actually does the behavior, instead of getting that immediate reinforcement, possibly there's going to be a little more time between the behavior and the reinforcement, or we're going to make the reinforcement more natural in terms of having it less like a token system or a toy or something, and will just be that the replacement, like using your speech, is reinforced by you accessing what you wanted, or is reinforced by you being able to communicate with individuals in a much more appropriate way than with unwanted behaviors. So you always want to make sure you're decreasing the reinforcement, but not eliminating it completely. And of course, monitor, monitor, monitor. Collect data, monitor to make sure things are going right, that the learner is using the replacement behavior, the type and intensity of prompts is being lowered, and we're constantly making changes based on that data collection. You might think, oh my gosh, this is a lot of work. Like, this is like a true intervention, and this is, I don't have time to do this and to do my speech and language therapy. Well, unfortunately, you got to make time, because behavior is not something that you can just kind of hope goes away. It's not something that, you know, if the kids are at this point that you can kind of just guess at what's going on for them. You do have to put the time in, like any intervention, and do it well, and do it with data, and do it with assessment, and monitor it and make changes to it. So if you're thinking, I don't want to work with kids who have behavior, then you probably shouldn't work with human beings then, because everyone has behavior. And so this is something that I hope you're excited to work with people with autism to help with their behavioral issues, and to replace it with functional communication. You're gonna feel awesome if you're working with a kiddo who used to hit people to get their attention, and now they're actually using their iPad to get attention from others and peers. Like, could there be anything greater in the world than that? Like, that's awesome. So I hope you're really excited to work with this population and help them learn communication skills, because it will absolutely decrease those ugly behaviors, and will give them skills for the rest of their lives. Okay, thanks guys.